Why your past doesn't define who you are. People have so many different life stories and so many different life experiences, and you have the power to choose differently. You have the power to choose and create your own life rather than just going in the flow of the common society. It seems easy just to get in it, live the day in and out, wake up, go to work your job, go home, have a meal, and do whatever you do in the evening, and do it all over again. I used to live like that, and having that external structure was nice because I was relying on somebody else to create that structure. For example, if I didn't wake up in the morning to go to my job, well, I imagine that after consistently doing that for a week or two, probably wouldn't have a job. So you can create the life that you want. And it's not as easy as it seems or as it can be perceived to be. It requires courage and strength and perseverance, if that's the right word. So here's a little choice that I've made. I have struggled with speech since I was a child. I remember in kindergarten going to speech therapy and learning how to pronounce L's, like ball or wolf. And it was really difficult, honestly, because I would just go ball or wolf. And it was a multitude of sounds that I really struggled with. And I developed like a lisp, and I couldn't be understood properly. I also learned a second language by the time I was 7. So initially, I learned English from 0 to 7, and then I moved into a French school and learned French. So I had this kind of battle of learning the French language at school, but speaking English in my social settings. And then in grade 6, I also went back to speech therapy around R's. I couldn't pronounce R's very well. And it wasn't until I reached high school that I realized that I know two broken languages. I can speak French very well and I can understand French and I could read like books in French. I couldn't really understand what I was reading a lot of the time. So it took me a bit longer to register the information. Uh, but when I got to high school, I was in English and I learned that, oh, I really don't know how to spell in English. I really am terrible at reading out loud, and I don't know any of these words, what they mean. So that was a huge struggle for me to try and succeed in a language I didn't know all that well, but also couldn't go back to the other language. Something super fascinating that I found about learning two languages is that my brain could compat in both. So, like, I could register both languages. Um, and I think that's really neat. Like, I can think in both if I wanted to, or just think in one or translate it as best as I can. So I just kind of like allowed that to be a struggle. And when you did English class, yet I had to learn English grammar in grade 9 because I knew French grammar. and how to structure your sentences in English because I knew how to structure them in French. Uh, so that was a struggle. And when I was out of high school in my earliest 20s, because I'm only 23, I feel like I'm still pretty early in them, I began really enjoying reading um, informational books and psychological books. But again, like I didn't understand some of the words, and a part of me didn't really want to put that extra effort into learning them. So it became difficult to express myself due to the lack of language. And it was about a year ago when James and I would were traveling in Houston to do to go from one job to the next job, or just who knows, Houston, you got to drive an hour to get to anywhere. Um, but I bought books and I started reading them out loud. And I was really intimidated to read them out loud because I was aware that I struggled with reading out loud. I hated it in school. Like, did not enjoy having to use my voice to read the book because I would mess up and it was embarrassing. Like, it was really embarrassing that I was a late teenager and I still couldn't pronounce words, or I didn't know how to break down a word, or I wasn't aware that, IE made a different sound than just EE, right? Like, I I didn't learn that until I was in late high school. So I felt shame and embarrassment around my intellect. So when I came to reading out loud with James, it really helped me because at first I would read really, really fast and I would just go through it. And I could understand it because I was like keeping it in my mind. And I was like, oh, this makes sense. But then he would say, I just can't understand you. Can you slow down? And at first I felt so challenged. I was like, are like really? I felt challenged by his suggestion because I felt sensitive in that topic because of all the shame and embarrassment I had felt previously. And it was like, swallow your ego, let that aside, and just slow down. So I did. I began slowing down and reading. And then I learned that I didn't stop for the proper punctuation. I would just bulldozer over a comma or a semicolon, which I didn't actually learn what those were until late high school as well. And honestly, I barely understand what they actually mean right now. But I would just go right through and just kind of jumble the paragraph or sentences together and hope that he understood. And if he didn't, then I try and explain it rather than reading the words properly. So as we did this, it kind of just became a habit of ours. Like I would bring books and I would read them, and he would give me suggestions on how I could read better. And what one thing that he did, which I really, really appreciated, was if I was having a hard time pronouncing a word, most of the time he would know what I was trying to pronounce and he would reiterate it to me. So he'd say the word and then I'd say it back. And I dug my heels in with that because, again, like I was embarrassed that I couldn't pronounce a word. And he would go back and forth with me to say it again and pronounce it slowly, which for me reminded me of being, a 6 year old or a 7 year old, or I think I was like 10 in grade 6 or 12, something like that. And having to sit there with that speech therapist and they're like, okay, repeat it back. Okay, try again. Okay. And it's just like embarrassing. So I was re experiencing that embarrassment with James, uh, with how to pronounce the word. the words that I was reading. But after about a month of doing this almost on a daily, there was a huge improvement in my reading ability. And both of us noticed it. And it was like, wow, I no longer feel that nervousness or embarrassment with my reading ability. And what really helped me, excuse me, be able to continue that was that he never laughed. He didn't even like phase it. He never criticized it. He was always supportive and helping me build that skill. And I became I I was I became comfortable with practicing that skill with him because he didn't shut me down or ridicule me. And that was another thing that I had experienced growing up was because of what would be labeled as a speech impediment. I would get teased, and made fun of. And that only grew the embarrassment more, the shame more, and really made me not want to talk or speak. And when I look at that and the perspective of how that has shaped me and who I am and who I've become, it really taught me like not to share my voice because when I shared my voice, I'd get laughed at. It pushed me down, and I had let that have power over me for so many years, and I allowed it to navigate who I was. Um, so fast forward to when we had Alexandria. After right before I birthed her, like 3 days before my birth, the birth started, I began reading The Hobbit out loud, and I got like 3 chapters in, all on my own, and then I began the birthing process. Uh, not long after, and James would read to me The Hobbit. Um, he read it to me while I was just relaxing, or if I just needed something to be going on. And he read it, and then we finished it after I birthed her, and then we read the Lord of the Rings, and we got to that third book and stopped after like 3 months of reading the Lord of the Rings. Anyways, I noticed how he could read, and it was wonderful. He could read the book so fluently, and he did the voices, and he paused, and he changed his tonality, and I really grew an admiration in his ability to read a story because it painted that picture beautifully in my mind. I knew exactly what he was saying. I knew exactly where they were in the story. I could imagine it as if I was watching the movie. And what he would do when he would run into a word he didn't know, he'd immediately look it up and just, oh, that's what that means. Okay. And so now we knew what that word meant and we could continue on with the story. And it's just a skill that I've been working on for a few years now. And it kind of ties into this right now with me speaking into the mic and speaking into the camera and learning how to say what I'd like to say clearly without rambling on, which is a tendency that I have, or adding a bunch of fluffer words, which is also a tendency I have had. Uh, and being able to speak. I don't know where I was going with that, but being able to speak with clarity has been something that I've been growing towards, And I realized, like, yeah, that's a skill and it's a communication skill. Um, and I'm really happy for where I've come with it. I just want to circle back to like how embarrassment and shame around my voice has impacted me because it ties into being able to speak my truth. If I have felt by if with feeling shame and embarrassment by speaking has gone hand in hand with shame and embarrassment of speaking my truth. And when I say truth, I mean like there's an abundance of truth that I've experienced. Whether it's learning the truth that like, hey Phoebe, you're not that great at speaking. That's a truth. So how can I make it a different truth? I can make a different truth by, hey Phoebe, you've worked on this skill so much that now you've become an excellent speaker. Congratulations, you worked through that. Now you have a new truth. Um, but not speaking your truth. And if I for me thinking about that, it's like, oh my throat chakra has been plugged up, blocked because of the fear and the shame, embarrassment that I experienced growing up around my voice. Um, there was a point to that, but I don't no longer want to be blocked in that. So a while ago, James and I attended an event, and it was super transformable for us both. And for me, what it was like, again, learning that like it is okay to speak my truth. And that actually, when you speak your truth, you get to meet so many more people on a like deeper level because you've met yourself at a deeper level. So I went to this event. It was a 3-day event, and um, I got to see so many people speak up and talk about their life struggles, and so many people who made like major breakthroughs and had the space to heal, excuse me, those parts of themselves. And me too, like I had that space as well to reflect. And a huge part of that was like breath work. We did 3 days of breath work. And each time I did breath work, it was like a new barrier was crossed and was removed, and a new perspective came about. Um, and every time when I heard somebody else speak, it was deeply resonating with myself, um, and what was kind of hurting me still, and that led to the opportunities of like sharing that with James and talking to him about it and letting him in even deeper to know like some more truth about me, because in our relationship we're very honest, very honest and very open and truthful. um, but I came back to Upslaw after that event and I realized like, yeah, I've been like so afraid to talk about things, to talk to people about my life. And I started doing that. I started even like because I had a group of women in my life whom I would go and seek counsel is what called it. I would go to my aunts and I would be like, hey, and I just like crack open this big conversation or like have them speak into me. And I had a friend whom I call Mamu, also speak into me, and I had her there for like since I was like 13, and I like grown older, like I've been able to process things better and better on my own. But like 13 until like I swear 19 years old, I was going to her house and I was sitting down at her kitchen table, and we would talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about life. what was going on, what was learning, like everything. We were figuring it out together. She helped me figure it out. And my grandma, like I just sit there with her around her at her table, and we'd smoke cigarettes and drink coffee, and we'd just get into life. And I love that and deeply appreciate it. Like it lights me up to think about that. That I would go and sit down with these ladies and just like tell them, yeah, this is what I'm struggling with. This is the scenario, what's happening with my friends, and I'm not sure how to deal with it. And I've been thinking about how it's affecting me, and I've been noticing these behaviors, and them like asking me questions to deeper understand it. And that's a practice that I've really carried out with me. It's like my grandma would ask me so many questions, and I'd be able to sit there and reflect, and then the answer would come to me, and that taught me like how to ask myself questions. So when I'm pondering something, I have so many of like this James tells me I have like 50 different lenses that I kind of look at this thought and I check it all out. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I understand the root of it now. For example, my throat, my speech, my voice. I now understand that I had a lot of shame and embarrassment around my voice. And the embarrassment and shame, that feeling came from going through speech therapy and feeling unable to, or being surrounded with peers who would criticize and make fun of me because of my voice. And so that developed this feeling of shame and embarrassment that grew and grew and grew until fear also tagged along with it and was like, oh, Phoebes, don't do that, because if you speak and you mess up, the fear of messing up, you're going to feel embarrassment. And you don't want to feel embarrassment because you know how that feels. It's icky. It's like, oh, and we'd rather just not feel that. So don't do that because that's scary and that's uncomfortable. And no, and now I have the skills and the tools, the lenses to be like, okay, I noticed when I got up to talk, um, at church once. I got up at church once and I spoke, and I noticed that right before I was going to speak, I got really nervous and I was scared. And I just want to know why I felt nervous and scared, and I would go and process it, and I'd communicate with James, and anybody else, honestly, at this point. Uh, anyways, I just learned to be okay with the feeling and go into it and kind of explore it without any judgment, because I don't want to judge myself. I don't want to judge anybody. Everybody has so many different life experiences that it's not worthwhile to judge them. So when I came back to Uppsala, I started, reaching out to people whom I had been away from, because in Texas, I was just like blinders on. I don't got time for that. I don't have space for that right now. I have a lot of things to figure out with James, and. But when I got back to Uppsala, I made the effort to start visiting people and just opening up and telling them, like, yeah, this was really hard and this is what I learned from it, and I'm actually still very grateful for that, because it taught me all these new lessons about life that are going to stay with me in the future. And I became okay with sharing my experience, and I became okay to stay true to me. And a big thing about that was I was pregnant, and I had chosen, before being pregnant, I'd chosen, like, I am going to have a wild birth. I'm going to have a wild pregnancy. And it's labeled wild now when really it's just natural. I'm going to have a natural pregnancy where there's nobody checking out my vitals and nobody's prawing on my baby. I'm trusting my body, which is all natural. And I'm going to birth naturally. Nobody's going to intervene, and nobody's going to be telling me how to do things and what I should be doing. I've got this. I trust me. I trust my body, and I trust the natural ability of a woman, whom I am. I am a woman. And I was like super like, yep, I'm no, I'm not. I don't have a midwife. No, I have not gone to the doctor. No, I trust that. I'm having a baby girl and her name is Alexandria. Yeah, I'm experiencing these symptoms in my body. Yeah, I'm not afraid to have this baby because I worked through the fear. Because when I got afraid about potentially dying when having a baby, I faced myself and I was like, well, why are you afraid of die, Phoebe? Why are you scared of death, Phoebe? What is it? Because you're going to die one day. It's inevitable. It's a promise. You're going to die. So what are you really afraid of? And it was like, well, I'm afraid of this version of me to die because the next version of me, I don't know her. Okay, so you're not afraid of the death of the physical being. You're afraid of the death of the self. And that's okay, yet that's not something to hold you back. And I got to work through that. It was really amazing to figure that one out. But I just started sharing and expressing myself and being okay with that instead of like allowing somebody else's perspective on birth is just super simple to talk about on how to birth affect me. And also like respecting other people's methods of birthing. Just because I'm not going to go and have a doctor be it with me or a midwife be with me, that does not make it the best way to do it, the most virtuous way to do it. That is my choice. If some other lady decides that she wants to have midwives and she feels like that is the best thing for her and that's her safest route, that's her choice. And I can respect that. And I can respect my choice because that's her truth, not mine. And right, being able to go and see these people and just be like, yeah, this is like my vulnerability. This is what I've been dealing with. This is what this scenario was like. And these are the feelings that came up. And this is how I processed it. Really just like cracked open this ability to see people deeper. And when I got to see people deeper, I could understand them more and more and more. And I cherish that because I also understand how challenging and scary it can be to be vulnerable. Of course, because, just like how I was a kid and I was scared to talk and I felt vulnerable when I had to read out loud, letting somebody in after being ridiculed for that, it feels scary. So that could carry over as we're adults, as you're an adult. I know it has for me. That's something I've lived with. And so being able to talk to women and mainly women, honestly, I don't really have many male friends. I have my husband, he's my best friend. But being able to talk about things openly, I really appreciated that. Um, it showed me that like that block that was there, it began to move and began to be removed. So I want to just like throw a big thank you out there for all the women that opened up with me and allowed me to see deeper into them because I'm aware that that requires strength and courage and vulnerability. And I deeply appreciate people who can be vulnerable and honest because I like to be vulnerable and honest. I like to just lay it out because I'm not afraid of what you're going to say. So, thanks.